Well, now the next thing I want to talk about is Claudia's favorite subject. You know, years ago when I was in the churches and studying the Christian religion, studying the Bible, and I was really trying to find out what the truth was. This was probably back in the, I'm going to guess maybe mid-'80s or early '90s, somewhere back in that time frame. I was trying to figure out the truth of the Bible, and I decided to order a book called The Lost Books of the Bible. And I started reading through the Lost Books of the Bible, and I bought this book. I actually bought it right out of a bookstore at the time. It was a fairly new publication, and that book I bought has long since disappeared, and you can't find it anywhere. You can't get it on Amazon. I don't know why that book has completely disappeared off the face of the earth, but one of the things that I remember reading in this particular book was an old story about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And the way the story went was God created Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve repeatedly committed suicide. They would jump off cliffs. They would drown themselves. They would kill each other. They just did not want to live. And it took about 6 or 7 times of God recreating Adam and Eve, according to this book, before Adam and Eve settled down and decided not to commit suicide anymore. And I could never, ever figure out what in the world was going on. I mean, here you have a glorious, wonderful God creating man for the first time and blessing him and doing all these wonderful things. Why in the world would Adam and Eve want to commit suicide? It just did not make sense to me. And over the years, well, now I've come to understand what that was all about. What that was all about was the God that most people think is that wonderful, glorious God of a wonderful heart and all these things that everybody attribute God the Father, quote unquote, as being a very benevolent, wonderful, loving God. As it turns out, it wasn't that created Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were created by DNA experimentation, and it was done by a group of reptilians led by Enki. And it turns out that when Enki used his DNA engineering expertise, he took the primates from planet Earth, altered their DNA, injected some of their own DNA, and made Adam. And as soon as Adam became a living being, the way humans are today, they were very conscious and very aware of who they were and what they were there for. And I know a lot of people may find this really, really hard to swallow, but if you read the Bible, in the Bible it says after Adam, was around for a while, God came back and said, well, Adam needs a helpmate. And the helpmate happened to be Eve. And so God said, well, what I'll do is I'll make a helpmate for Adam and I'll create woman. And in the Bible it says that God took a rib, put Adam to sleep and took a rib out of Adam and used that rib to form woman, to form Eve. Well, most people have studied that and they're saying, well, how in the world is God making a woman out of Adam's rib? Well, it turns out if you do a study of the Hebrew writings, that word for rib was never understood. Nobody could understand what the word for rib meant, and even up to this day, most people don't know what it really means. But the term for rib really means Adam's DNA. That's what the rib was. So right in the Bible it says that Eve was created out of the DNA from Adam. Well, Adam was already perfected, and so now that you have the perfect man, the reptilians made a woman so they could do reproduction, and it was done out of DNA. Well, my question to people is, well, if God can use DNA to create Eve, why didn't he use DNA to create Adam out of using the primates for the original basis of creating Adam? And so that's how the story goes. And they were when Adam and Eve were created, they were fully aware of why they were created. There were two reasons why Adam and Eve were created. Number one, they were created to be food for the reptilians from Orion. And second, they were to be the slave labor to go in the gold mines and mine the gold off the planet for the reptilians, because they had a dying planet back in Orion, and they wanted food and they needed gold to take that back and help heal the atmosphere and heal the dying planet back in Orion. And Adam and Eve were fully consciously aware that's why they were existed. Now, let me go to part two. Part two was a couple of months ago, I was able to find another edition of Lost Books of the Bible, and it has two books in it called Adam and Eve 1 and Adam and Eve 2. And if you want to read that, Adam and Eve were constantly in fear of their lives. They were so afraid they could hardly make it through a day. As a matter of fact, Adam and Eve were constantly fasting for 40 and 80 days at a time. They were fasting and doing sacrifices to God because they were in supreme fear of their lives. I mean, and it doesn't make sense. I mean, if you think of God as a loving God, why would his creation be living in fear all the time, thinking that if they didn't do a sacrifice and repent of something, that they would be killed and tortured or eaten or whatever? I mean, you can read that right in Adam and Eve 1 and Adam and Eve 2. So my question is, why were they so traumatized? Well, they were traumatized because they knew that the gods that created them were, might eat them at any time. They might come to them in the middle of the night. Okay, you're my midnight snack. And that's got to be pretty terrifying for somebody that's fully aware. So anyway, in order to get Adam and Eve to comply, they set up a system where they created cattle and sheep and other animals, and they made a pact with Adam and Eve, and they said, well, we'll tell you what, if you will raise these cattle and animals for us, and you will sacrifice them, we will eat the cattle instead of you. So we're still going to use you for slave labor, but at least you're not going to be eaten for food. So we're going to let you raise cattle and sacrifice your bulls and cows and your sheep, and that has become the foundation for the sacrificial religions, like the Jewish religion and the Christian religion are all based on sacrificing, and that's where the sacrifice started. And the promise of return, the reptilians did a false flag operation when they were in the Garden of Eden. They had one of their other reptilians come up and tell them not to eat a certain fruit out of a tree, and Adam and Eve did it anyway. They got talked into it. It was a false flag operation. So Adam and Eve were kicked out of that real nice place where they were created, and they were promised that down the road a Savior would come back and have the ability to return them to the paradise of the Garden of Eden. And that's the religion today. Jesus is going to come back and return you to paradise. It's all a false flag lie perpetrated by the reptilians. Now, I have Claudia here who has firsthand knowledge of exactly what God looked like, how he appeared to Adam and Eve as a shivering person, and pretended that they were gods, but they're really reptilians that altered their form for Adam and Eve. Claudia, would you like to expand on that for us?
Yes, sir. Thank you. In the garden, which was really the farm that the reptilians who came to this planet or discovered it first used to supply their home world with food products. These were called Orions because they came from the constellation Orion. They look like lizards, like geckos that you see on that Geico commercial. They don't talk because they don't have the vocal cords to talk, but they can squeak or squawk like that. They don't need that because they communicate by telepathy, mental telepathy. Excuse me. They have great mental powers and capabilities. They can look at a person and know immediately what that person is made of, because they have the ability to read the person's DNA information, just like we read in a newspaper. Over years, they have developed this capability. Now, one of the other things, attributes that the Orion creatures, excuse me, I'm sorry, let me get a drink of water. Okay, they have learned, or their species lives many years, and by many years, I mean thousands of years. Now, that's hard to accept in a moment, but just bear with me, and you'll understand why I brought that up. A year in our life goes very quickly. The reptilian amount of time of a year is 1,000 years. Now, if you lived 1,000 years compared to one of our years, when you got to be 70 or 80, you would be 70 to 80 years on Earth. The reptilians who live on their home world in Orion, which is in the middle star of the belt of Orion, they live thousands of years. For them, it would be 700,000 years. So in that time, they have the time to gather information. They have learned a lot about how to manipulate DNA, the codons in the DNA, and so on and so forth. They can change whatever they want on any kind of corporeal body. One of the things that this has given them the ability to do is to animals that have short lifespans, mammals like us. They can experiment to see what happens and follow it through several generations. So when they came to Earth and they improved or upgraded the smartest monkey on the planet, they were able to see what effects had of their genetic manipulation. They are genetic scientists on the genius level and above. So here they are with a smart monkey who is sentient and can operate machinery and do slave labor and can be eaten at the same time. This was a win-win situation for the Orions, not so for us. We were in terrible jeopardy and lived in terrible fear all the time because they know that the Orions could come and eat us at any time. Now, an Orion body form is over 300 feet tall and weighs a couple of tons. So, yeah, we would do anything they said because they had the power, so to speak. So, as the smart monkeys of humans lived on this planet, they were given certain privileges and a place to live in the garden and given food to eat and shelter. one of the things that the Orions could do in their present body form was to hypnotically or mentally command the monkey to bow down and worship them as a god. The Orions told the smart monkey humans, "I'm your god." And they would do little parlor magic tricks. Appears a ball of light and shimmering. They could levitate certain things like a rock or something mentally. They could change water, the molecular structure of water, to another substance. So here the humans were convinced through tricks, mental tricks and aberrations, and also given mental suggestions, just like a hypnotist gives you a mental suggestion, you're a chicken, and to squawk like a chicken, and you'll squawk like a chicken in those nightclub acts. These happen all the time in front of us, but we don't connect the dots. See, does this same thing happen in another genre, like at church? I don't know. Who started church? Well, the Orions, in order to control their monkeys, one instigated the idea of God and to bow down and worship the shimmering light in front of them, and who was speaking to them. There was no body. It was just a voice and telling them to do certain things. And then they could, in some instances, if a person was injured or hurt or sick, they could heal them with just simple antibiotics that they had, or something to that point. And that would make a miracle in front of the smart monkey's eyes. So naturally it reinforced the concept of God. And God concept was used to control the smart monkeys. They had thousands upon thousands of these smart monkeys working in their minds, growing the crops on their farms. And also, if they weren't paying attention and behaving, they would be used as food source also. Flesh is flesh. Doesn't matter if it's human or cow. It's still edible to the Orions. So there we have the beginnings of control of the smart human monkeys. And it has continued down to this day. An offshoot of one of this control factor is government. Laws were made by the Orions and through their quote-unquote scenario of a God program, and people were told to worship and follow it, and if they didn't, terrible things would happen to them. They would have committed a sin and need to be punished for it. So the humans were very carefully led down a path that was leading to our present-day control through government and through religion. It's a sad state of affairs, but some people are waking up and starting to question this control. Well, do I need to really do this? What if I don't do it? What's going to happen to me? Sometimes nothing happens at all because you're of no importance to anybody for anything. We just want you to get up and go to work. Everybody knows where they are on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. They're either at work or in school, or if they have other means, neither place. So here is the conundrum. Do we stay asleep and unaware and just believe what's being said to us, or do we wake up and question and ask and observe and see what happens? Lots of people observe the Twin Towers that Bob just spoke about a little while ago. Lots of people observe many miracles, and they say, oh, this is God, this is God. Orions have the capability to travel through many vibrational levels of existence. An example would be like when somebody blows a dog whistle, the dog hears it, but the human can't because we can't pick up that frequency. Or like we'll see our cat in the living room staring into space and looking intently at something. They're seeing a different frequency or level, and they can see what's going on there, but we can't. Us humans cannot access above a certain red frequency or a certain blue frequency. We just can't see it because we don't have the capability. So a lot of stuff can go on around us, and we will not be aware of it. Recently in the news, youngsters in school were able to use their cell phone to talk to another youngster in another classroom. And on a certain frequency, the teacher could not hear it. Now, we tried this experiment ourselves with our family, and it was so. The adults could not hear the cell phone message, but the other children in the room could hear it just fine. But when you grow up and you lose, I guess, certain capabilities, that's one of them that goes. You can't hear it. So when we focus on our children and what they're seeing and able to relate to us, that we don't become bent out of shape, that we're able to handle information that's different than what we were led to believe. And we are reinforced this in our educational system, to be dumbed down, to be unaware, and to not question authority. Authority rules our lives. Anyway, I didn't want to go on too long in case somebody else would like to talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Claudia. That was absolutely wonderful and very, very educational.